Hi, and welcome. Joining us today from California is Dr. Martin Rayala. Dr. Rayala is a well-known expert in education, especially in curriculum and instruction, design education expertise as well. He's taught at all levels, from elementary right through teacher preparation at university level. He's the former state art, media, and design education supervisor for the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, and he's served on very prestigious education committees. He's also the past president of the what used to be called the National Telemedia Council. Now, of course, it's the International Council for Media Literacy, this one. There, he was instrumental in shepherding the Journal of Media Literacy, which is now well known. This was back in the 1990s. From its original form as a newsletter to a full-blown printed journal, until, of course, it later became a digital-only journal. Marty has also been a TEDx speaker. He earned his BS and MS from the University of Wisconsin and a PhD in art education from the University of Oregon. And at this point, I want to toss it over to Dr. Rayala, who can help us interpret and find answers to the one big question before us in this interaction, which is media literacy filling the right gaps at pedagogical levels? Over to you, Marty.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for all the work you're doing to make these things possible. You know, the education and media literacy are going through a lot of changes. And so even if we were filling all of the gaps right now, they're going to change very quickly. I think that not only change is going to be a constant, but the speed of change is increasing. And so we're going to have to be as agile as possible. And education hasn't had a history of being very agile. and so,
to say the least.
Yeah, so big changes are going to be happening, not only with education, which is changing from in the past. It was informing students about things that happened before they were born. It's sort of like the knowledge and skills that had been developed over time. And that was the main mission of education. But today we've added in some things like how to be the best person you can in the time that you are living. So we're looking more at the present. In fact, in the early days, that was forbidden for us. You know, that was sort of left up to the family, the churches, and things like that. But now we're expected to help students with their sort of mindfulness kind of training. And then the third thing that's changed is we're focusing more on designing for the future because of all this change and training teachers for jobs, for example, that are students for jobs that are available now might not be as useful because that job might not be available when they come out. And so we're having to think more futuristically and train people and educate people for a future that doesn't yet exist. Right. But how do we do that? So so education is changing a lot. And at the same time, media is changing. When back then, it was called the National Telemedia Council started. Even before that was the International Council for Better Broadcasting. And it basically was about radio, you know, and then television came along, and that's where we got that Telemedia Council, you know, a strange name like that. Right. That was the thing at the time. And of course, then now we've got everything from social media to virtual reality coming up and all kinds of things. And so media is changing a great deal as well. And just keeping up with that is going to be one of the challenges. And then the other thing is that the world is changing. We're going into now quantum computing and artificial intelligence and decentralized autonomous organizations and blockchain and things like that are just going to make, in the next 10 years, make a world that we can hardly recognize.
Right. So that is so fascinating to me because it looks like education was built on the premise that we live in a stable world and that it can be explained through history. And what you're saying is that it can't. We can no longer depend on history to define our future because the future, it seems we are crafting as we go along, which has always been true, but it looks like the speed is so much now that it's palpable. And therefore, we need to prepare for that kind of, not the future, but the change into the future. And you're saying that, therefore, education cannot afford, therefore, and certainly media literacy education included, needs to look at the future. So what are the some of the specific things that you would want media literacy education to do?
Well, you're exactly right that this change is going to be the thing we'll have to focus on. And one of the problems with media literacy is that a certain faction of the movement at the time were really people who didn't like media. They were sort of into censorship.
Right.
And the organizations had formed in order to fight media.
Right.
And while organizations like the now IC4ML are not of that type, that they're really contemporary cutting edge organizations,
Right.
there's still that lingering kind of thing in education. It used to be a time in my field when if I said in giving a presentation that I don't let my students use computers, we all do hands-on, I would get applause and cheers from the crowd, and it was very common for media literacy was started by a lot of English teachers, for example. And it's very common phrase is the book is better than the movie.
Right.
It's sort of like we were giving subtle messages that media wasn't good. And even today, I mean, they spend a lot of effort to keep students from having media while they're in school. What do we do about locking up their cell phones? And how do we keep them from using Wikipedia and things like that? So there's still this tendency to resist media. And that'll be one of the major changes that we have.
Like that media literacy literally pivots that, right? Like, in fact, upends it in some ways, in that without those media devices, media literacy is redundant.
Yes, yeah, and we sort of confine it into certain thought patterns. For example, there's another organization that helped develop the media arts standards.
Right.
And it's interesting because that group isn't really, there's not much overlap with this group or the other media literacy groups. And it's so the conversations should be more inclusive than that. And the media arts group sort of was constrained by their mindsets of they focused on the arts side of it. So here they were developing national standards for schools in media arts. And because they focused on the arts more than the media, they had a hard time including anything about television.
Right.
Because that wasn't artsy enough kind of thing. And how do you do media without talking about television? And so those kinds of constraints, the silos in which we have placed ourselves with traditional education have always been a problem.
So, but where television was at that, so this is so fascinating because you've seen that transition. Because today it seems social media is where television might have been at the time. We're villainizing it, right?
Yes. Yeah. So social media and very soon more ubiquitous forms of augmented reality, artificial in virtual reality and augmented extended reality, if you will, for the whole thing. That's something like we should be ahead of. We shouldn't be sort of resisting it, and it's going to evolve. It's going to be very prevalent, and we can't have education be 20 years behind the times all of the time. It has to become more agile, more lean, more responsive. And so I think that paying attention to things like quantum computing, decentralized education, as well as the economy and all aspects of our life, and the speed of change are really going to be essential for us to survive and thrive in the future.
We live now in what's called a mediated, or we live a mediated life, it seems. So media is at the center of all information, and I get that. Should we equate or should we juxtapose media and information literacy?
Oh, that it's interesting because that has been a discussion all of the time. In fact, when I worked at the state level in Wisconsin, and I was fighting to get media literacy as part of our curriculum, we had one problem. First of all, where did it belong? Was it in an English class? Was it in a computer science class? Was it in the arts program? Was it in journalism? And so
it looks like now it's everywhere, right?
yes.
According to the new curriculum.
Yeah, and that's a strength and a weakness because
right.
Since it's everywhere, then, for example, at the state level, there wasn't anybody in charge of it.
That's right.
They just said, well, you all handle it. And so
exactly.
To neglect media literacy had a problem. But we had the same problem with environmental education at the time. Right. Where did that fit in? So having a specific identified area has been a part of the growing pains. But also, as you point out, it might be one of its strengths because then it didn't get siloed. It didn't get put into one little box.
So in that case, are you seeing what we're seeing right now as teething problems where teachers need better formal, institutionalized training, but that kind of training is not the same thing as a training in a subject. It's more a training overall, how to embed media literacy or information literacy into, I don't know, chemistry.
Exactly. And it's been one of the interesting challenges in that the way people have been trained to become teachers has been counterproductive in this change. I started a high school as part of my career after having worked at the university level and at the state level. I was sort of feeling like, am I getting too far away from this? Am I living in this ivory tower? And so I said, let me immerse myself in this. And so we actually started a high school with certain ideas about trying to create a school that would meet the needs. And one of the problems I had is that trying to hire even the best teachers who were attracted to this innovative new school that we were developing didn't have the background training for it. And so if I asked them to create a course in which the students get to select the project that they're going to work on, so project-based learning, I could sort of sell that idea. But then I said, but you don't choose the project. Help the students find out what project they want to work on. That put them into tilt. That was a tough kind of thing. And so I've now developed a global organization to try to help do this. And it comes down to basically 4 steps.
Is that the Enso?
Yes, we call it Enso, which is a sort of a Zen, the circle, that you see on all kinds of things.
Right.
It's a circle of connectedness kind of thing.
Right. Like the mandala.
Yes, yeah. And so the first step in that is we call question. And we call them these 4 quests, the language we use but 4 goals, 4 objectives kind of thing. And the first one is question. Be sure that you're asking the right questions. Don't jump to the answers right away. And be sure you're solving the right problems. And that takes 2 steps. One is examining yourself, like what is it that you're interested in, and then examining the needs in the world. What does the world need from you? And if we can match that up, you have the ideal life. As they say, you never have to work a day into your life because you're just doing what you wanted to do. So after you've done that, and you've got the right questions, or at least, some of them outlined, then we go to the imagination quest.
Okay.
In which we try to come up with as many possible solutions to the problems we've identified, as many possible answers to the questions that we have come up with. And
you kind of imagine the answers.
Yes, and we have to change hats then, because that first quest was a lot of rational thinking, a lot of knowledge-based and inquiry and doing some research. And the next, this one, we sort of, let's shut off those things, those inhibiting factors, and loosen up the creativity and get the elaboration and fluency and flexibility in there.
So The last thing that because I can go on and on with this conversation, it seems, but the last question, in the interest of time, is does this kind of creative, I don't know, disruption or creative destruction or just creativity come in the way of what media literacy considers to be the heart of media literacy, which is critical thinking?
Yes, and that's been its identification for quite a while, but I think that it will benefit if it includes not only that, like critical thinking is one of the four United States basic skills, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creativity.
Right.
Well, it would be good if if we didn't identify media literacy as just critical thinking, it included that. And so production should be part of this. History should be part of this. Criticism should be part of this, and general aesthetics, or the philosophical range. Like Marshall McLuhan wasn't a media critic in that sense. He wasn't writing reviews of TV shows or movies or something. He was thinking in a broader sense. And some of the people coming into this are people who have worked in comic books and now are making movies based off this. And in both cases, we had school systems and parents who were saying, don't waste your time with this, do something for this. So they had to do this despite all of the best efforts of the parents and the educators that they were confronted with.
I think it's fair to say then that it needs to be an amalgamation of creativity and critical thinking. And that's the only way you can create this well-rounded, media literate or literate individual through pedagogy.
Yes, and it'll be the case that an individual will focus on one of those. Like I've got friend Henry Jenkins, for example, who I see regularly now. He has this sort of fan culture kind of thing, and the transmedia idea, and the participant culture kind of thing, and that's great. I've got these other friends who are really into old movies, and so they do that. And then I've got other people who are working in virtual reality. And so they're all exploring that. So everybody's going to end up falling into an area. But as educators, we need to provide that opening for them. We can't just focus on one of those areas and say, well, that's the focus of this course, because then all of those drop out. And this may be the only course that they get in it. And so it's a disservice. We have to provide the broader range and allow the student to select the piece they want. So they don't read all the same books, and they don't watch all of the same media. They watch the media and read the books that apply to what they need to know. Not everybody has to Kill a Mockingbird.
Well, Marty, that's a great quote, I guess, to end on, although this is the part I hate, because I don't think we should, it's fair on anybody to end this conversation at this point, but looks like we have to. So thank you so much for taking the time.
And thank you for doing this work. This is a great, I think, groundbreaking work that's going to be important in the history of media literacy.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Bye.